She had never once looked in the mirror and called herself beautiful. That wasn't self-pity, it was simply the truth that 23 years of living in Millhaven, Tennessee had carved into Nora Ellis like initials in an old oak tree. She was the kind of woman people described with words like dependable and sweet and the best listener I've ever known, words that meant everything and somehow, in the cruel arithmetic of the world, added up to invisible. She had wide brown eyes that missed nothing, a laugh she always covered with her hand because her mother once told her it was too loud, and a gentleness about her that made strangers feel instantly safe. She volunteered every Saturday at the food pantry off Route 9. She read to elderly residents at Sunrise Manor on Sunday afternoons. She fixed things, broken friendships, broken appliances, broken people, and asked for nothing in return. What Nora Ellis had never fixed, and had largely stopped trying to fix, was her own loneliness. Her mother, Diane, was a practical woman who wore her practicality like armor. She had raised Nora alone after Nora's father left when Nora was 7, and that abandonment had shaped Diane's entire philosophy on love. It was a transaction, and you had better know your value before you entered the market. So when Diane's old friend Patricia Vance mentioned that her nephew, a man named Daniel Vance who had recently moved back from Seattle to help run his family's lumber business in Millhaven, was looking to settle down, Diane did not ask Nora's opinion. She arranged a dinner. Nora found out about the arrangement the way she found out about most things in her mother's house, sitting at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning, coffee in hand, while her mother stood at the counter with her back turned, delivering news as though it were weather. Patricia's nephew is coming for dinner Sunday. He's 31, he's steady, and he comes from a good family. You'll wear your blue dress. That was the entire conversation. Nora opened her mouth, and then closed it again, and drank her coffee. She was not opposed to meeting someone. She was opposed to the feeling she always got at these arranged introductions, that terrible sense of being displayed, evaluated, found adequate or wanting. She was a human being, not a piece of furniture at an estate sale. But she loved her mother, understood the fear behind the practicality, and so on Sunday she wore the blue dress and she waited. What nobody had told Nora, what, remarkably, her mother either didn't know or had forgotten to mention, though Nora would later suspect it was entirely deliberate, was that Daniel Vance had been in a serious accident 3 years earlier. A logging accident that had left significant scarring along the left side of his face, down his neck, and across his left hand. Patricia had told Diane. Diane had decided that telling Nora ahead of time would only give her room to build anxiety and that it was better she simply see him and respond naturally. This was Diane's reasoning. It was not good reasoning. But it was her mother's reasoning, and by the time Sunday arrived, the dinner was already on the table and the doorbell was already ringing. Nora walked to the door. She opened it. And she saw Daniel Vance for the very first time. He was tall, that was the first thing she registered. Tall, with dark hair silvering at the temples despite his 31 years, wearing a neatly pressed blue button-down shirt that was almost certainly chosen without knowing she would be in blue too, and holding a bottle of red wine with the slightly stiff posture of a man who was nervous and trying very hard not to show it. And then her eyes moved to the left side of his face. The scarring was significant. It pulled at the corner of his eye slightly and traced down his jaw and neck in ridges that told a story of both terrible damage and remarkable survival. For one fraction of a second, one honest, human fraction of a second, Nora felt surprise move through her. And in that same fraction of a second, something else happened. Daniel saw her see it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes, which were a remarkable and steady gray, went carefully, professionally neutral, the way eyes go when they've practiced absorbing that particular reaction from strangers so many times that the practice has become reflex. It was that practiced neutrality that broke something open in Nora's chest. She recognized it. Not from her own face, but from the food pantry, from Sunrise Manor, from every person she had ever served or sat with who had learned to make themselves small before the world could make them smaller. She recognized the preemptive retreat of a person who had been disappointed by people's reactions so many times that they began the work of not being hurt before the hurt could arrive. And without thinking, Without calculating or performing or deciding, Nora Ellis smiled at Daniel Vance the same way she smiled at everyone she genuinely wanted to know. Wide, warm, and real. "You're wearing blue too," she said. "My mother is going to think she planned this." Something shifted in his eyes. Not dramatically, not like a movie moment with swelling strings, but quietly, the way a window shifts when someone opens it just slightly and the whole room changes without you being able to say exactly when the air became different. "She probably did plan it," he said, and a cautious smile moved across his face, careful at first, as if testing whether it was safe, and then more certain. "My aunt is her co-conspirator." "Terrifying," Nora said. "Come in." Dinner was, by most external measures, a normal dinner. Diane served pot roast. Patricia asked questions about Seattle. Daniel answered politely. But underneath all of that, between the passing of bread rolls and the refilling of water glasses, Nora and Daniel were having an entirely different conversation. She asked him about the lumber business and he answered with real knowledge and surprising passion. He loved wood, loved what you could build from it, loved the idea that something could be felled and become a bookshelf or a dining table or a front door that would stand for 100 years. She told him about the food pantry and he didn't do what most people did, which was offer a polite and distant admiration. He asked specific questions. What was the biggest gap in what they could offer? What did the families actually need that wasn't being met? He pulled out his phone and wrote something down. She noticed that. She didn't say anything. But she noticed. After dinner, while their mothers occupied themselves in the kitchen with the comfortable industry of women who believe they have managed a successful operation, Nora and Daniel sat on the back porch and the conversation slowed into something more honest. The night was warm for October. The yard backed up to tree line and the last light was threading through the leaves in long amber pieces. "I should have told you," he said suddenly. "About the accident. It wasn't fair to you to walk in not knowing." Nora looked at him. "Why should you have to announce it?" "Because people have reactions," he said simply. "And it's harder when they're not prepared to manage them." "You mean it's harder for you," she said quietly, "when you have to watch people manage their reactions while pretending you don't notice them managing." He was quiet for a moment. The trees moved. A single late cricket tried its luck somewhere in the grass. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I mean." They sat with that for a moment. Nora pulled her cardigan tighter and looked at the tree line and thought about the 100 different ways people learn to be brave in small, unremarkable, daily ways. Then she said, "Tell me about the accident. Only if you want to. Not for my sake, I'm not asking because I need the explanation. But because I think it might be one of the things that made you who you are and I'm interested in who you are." Daniel turned and looked at her for a long moment. Then he began to talk. He had been 28. Still working the floor with the crew despite having a management role, because he had always believed you couldn't lead people through work you weren't willing to do yourself. A cable had snapped on an unusually cold February morning, equipment that had been flagged for review that had been delayed, a delay that became the kind of cost that balance sheets can never actually account for. He had pushed his crew chief out of the way and taken the majority of the impact himself. The crew chief, a man named Gordon with 3 kids under 10, had walked away with a broken collarbone. Daniel had spent 4 months in the hospital and another 8 in various stages of reconstruction and recovery. He said all of this without self-pity and without the performed stoicism that was worse than self-pity. He said it the way a person tells the truth about something that happened to them, with the full weight of it present but not weaponized, not deployed for effect. "Gordon's youngest just started kindergarten," he said. "He sends me a photo every first day of school." He paused. "That's worth a lot of things." Nora felt something move through her that was not quite sadness and not quite joy but was the particular emotion that lives exactly between them, the one that only visits when you are in the presence of a human being who has suffered and chosen, against all reasonable odds, to remain tender. She thought about what she'd expected from this dinner. She thought about the blue dress and her mother's practicality and the thousand small ways she had moved through her own life being kind without ever expecting kindness to be returned in kind. And she thought about how she had walked to her own front door 20 minutes ago with the specific dull resignation of a woman going through emotion, and how she was now sitting on a porch in October starlight feeling more genuinely seen than she had in years. Not because he had done anything grand. Not because of a gesture or a speech. Simply because he was honest. Simply because he was, after everything, still curious, still present, still capable of asking what a food pantry actually needed and writing down the answer on his phone. She wanted to know more. She wanted to know everything. That wanting surprised her completely. She looked at the sky for a moment, then she looked at him. "Daniel," she said, "I've never been in a relationship that made me feel like I was worth the full version of someone. I've been with people who showed me the version they thought I wanted and kept the real thing locked up somewhere I wasn't allowed. I'm telling you this not because we've known each other 3 hours and I normally tell people this after 3 hours," she laughed, covering her mouth, and then deliberately uncovered it, "a small private decision, but because something about tonight feels like it matters and I don't want to waste it being strategic." Daniel looked at her carefully. "That laugh," he said. "Don't cover it." She blinked. "It's a great laugh," he said. "Cover it again and I'll consider it a personal offense." And Nora Ellis laughed, fully, loudly, the way her mother had always said she shouldn't, and Daniel Vance watched her like she was the most remarkable thing he had seen in a long time, which she was, which she had always been, which no one had ever had the good sense to tell her clearly enough for her to believe it. They did not fall in love that night. Love is not a door that opens in an evening, it's more like the tree line Daniel described in his work, something that grows slowly and becomes shelter so gradually that one day you simply look up and realize you've been standing in shade you didn't know was there. What happened that night was smaller and larger than love. Two people decided, without quite saying so, that they would give the other one a fair chance at being known. Over the following months, the fair chance became something neither of them had a precise word for. They walked the trail behind the lumber yard on Saturday mornings. They drove 2 hours to volunteer together at a regional disaster relief effort when flooding hit the county in December, and worked side by side filling sandbags until their arms ached, and drove home in comfortable silence with the specific companionable tiredness of people who have worked hard for something that mattered. Daniel followed through on what he'd written in his phone at dinner. He reached out to the food pantry and arranged for Vance Lumber to donate building materials for a badly needed storage expansion, then showed up on a Saturday in November with 4 of his crew members and built it. Nora stood in the parking lot watching the frame go up and felt something shift in the architecture of her heart. He told her once, in the early quiet of a Sunday morning over coffee, that the hardest part of the years after the accident had not been the surgeries or the recovery or even the pain. The hardest part had been learning to stop apologizing for what he looked like. Learning to stop reading every glance as a verdict. "I spent so long," he said, "waiting for people to see past it. And what I finally figured out was that the people worth keeping aren't looking past it. They're just looking at you. The whole thing. Like it's not a problem to be solved." Nora set down her coffee. "You just described how you've made me feel from the very beginning," she said. "Like I'm not a problem to be solved." He looked at her. "You're not. Neither are you." There it was. There was the whole of it, contained in 4 words exchanged over Sunday coffee, the entire philosophy of what it means to love someone well. Not the absence of difficulty. Not the pretending that things are other than they are. Simply the radical, revolutionary decision to look at another person completely and say, "You are not a problem. You are a person. And I want to know you." They were married the following September. Small ceremony, back porch, tree line turning gold behind them. Diane wore a green dress and cried into a handkerchief she pretended was for allergies. Patricia and Gordon's 3 kids sat in the front row. Standing at the makeshift altar they'd built from lumber, of course from lumber, looking at Daniel look at her, Nora thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, covering her laugh, walking to the door with resignation in her chest, expecting nothing and prepared to accept the nothing with grace. She had never expected this. She had never expected to be standing here, known fully, loved truly, by a man who had survived the unsurvivable and come through it not hardened but deepened. She had never expected that the thing she'd always quietly given to everyone else, the gift of being truly, patiently, unhurriedly seen, would one day be returned to her by a man holding her hands on a September afternoon with the whole gold world opening up behind him. But here is what the story of Nora Ellis teaches us, what it has always been quietly, insistently trying to say: kindness is not a consolation prize. Gentleness is not weakness. The people who give the most of themselves are not destined to receive the least. Sometimes, not always, not automatically, but sometimes, in the most unexpected doorway of the most ordinary Sunday, the universe looks up from its work and pays attention. Sometimes the girl who spent her whole life making others feel seen walks to her own front door and opens it. And the whole rest of her life walks in.